Well, the U.S. government expected to issue the equivalent of a slap on the wrist to the largest mortgage lenders over allegations of wrongful foreclosures and failure to modify loans for millions of struggling homeowners. That the tip of an iceberg to a raft of potentially fraudulent loans that currently sit inside the federal government, thus causing us to hit the debt ceiling. Now, Huffington Post reporting that the 5 biggest lenders will be asked to pay a measly $30 billion settlement on a multi-trillion-dollar problem. In exchange for that, they will pledge to do better.
Can't do worse.
You cannot do worse when it comes to foreclosure and mortgage servicing practices. In exchange, they will be, of course, absolved of any wrongdoing in any of the ongoing aspects of the crisis. If it wasn't so outrageous, if it wasn't a TV show, I'd be yelling and screaming right now, but I have to behave in a manner that's reasonably appropriate most of the time, and so I maintain my composure. Average Americans and Uncle Sam are on the brink of financial disaster, all because of the actions of these individuals. Joining us now, Barry Ritholtz, CEO and Director of Equity Research at Fusion IQ. Why is a proposal like this so insulting?
How much time do we have? It lets people who helped create the whole crisis off the hook. It lets people who knowingly engaged in criminality, knowingly engaged in fraud, doesn't even give them a slap of the wrist. It's just write a check. You want to go out and murder, rape, rampage, as long as you can write a check for a couple of $2 billion, which, by the way, we gave them. Remember, this isn't, we're going to have to reach into our pockets. We've given all these companies much more money than they're paying in fines. And so ultimately we find ourselves in a situation that nothing is going to be prevented from happening again in the future.
Let's talk about the firing of the investigators in Florida, which is Florida, we all know, is home to the Medicare fraud industrial complex,
right?
But it also is home to the fraud closure, housing fraud.
Robo-signing, really, that's the ground zero of robo-signing was Florida, all the foreclosure mills down there. Look, of all the parts of the country that was hit the worst by the real estate bust, South Florida, Vegas, California, really the worst zones. And so you have these 2 investigators who did yeoman's work finding out who really was engaged in criminality,
naming
in illegality.
Actually getting the document.
Put together, there's a seminal piece that went out that was a PowerPoint that explained exactly, here's where the fraud happened, here's how it was done, here's who was responsible. The Florida AG decided that for whatever reason, we're going to fire these people. No reason was given. Newly elected. This is just shameful. If I was in Florida, I would start a recall motion immediately. This is absolutely unacceptable.
The biggest story in America today, obviously, is the debt ceiling. Will we default? Will we not default? Should we raise taxes? Should we cut funding for poor people? No one seems to want to talk about how it is we got all this debt in the first place. You've done tremendous coverage with your book, Bailout Nation, and also before on the progression between the creation of household debt in America, going back to the 1990s, and then connecting the dots between that household debt to then ultimately the banks, because the household debt that was created couldn't be paid back into the banking system. So now the banks end up with all this debt, at which point the ratings agencies go to the insurance companies and say, you're insuring all this debt at the banks, they can't pay it. That's the AIG Sunday, blah, 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 blah. And then we take all the bank debt and we give it to Uncle Sam. And now we all wonder how this could possibly be what's happened.
Well, you know, I've been writing a lot about Reinhart and Rogoff, the 2 economists who warned about this back in January 2008. This is before Bear Stearns, before Lehman, before everything. And they said, prepare yourself. Credit crises cause very severe dislocations in stock markets, in real estate markets, but it also really causes a huge increase in debt because on a government level, tax revenues drop, unemployment goes up, and then there's always an attempt to throw money at it. It's not necessarily all the money that's spent on the bailout, which was a substantial sum, although less than originally believed. It's just suddenly the economy grinds to a halt, but your expenditures keep going. So tax revenue
So your bills stay high, but
That's
unemployment goes up.
Right.
And your house values go down, which means you're not collecting as much tax money.
That's right. And all this ends up on the shoulders of Uncle Sam. The state's headaches, Uncle Sam. Even things like Madoff, Uncle Sam has to cover. And then on top of all that, you have the bailouts and everything else. Don't forget, Fannie and Freddie have become the backdoor bailout for the banks. That's very likely going to be a couple of $100 billion as they offload their bad mortgages to Fannie and Freddie, who really are the only game in town.
Is there any way to solve the debt problems of our country and the world that doesn't include canceling debt?
Yes, there's a slow, painful way. We missed the first opportunity, which is to take insolvent banks, put them into, sort of like what we did with General Motors, put them into a prepackaged bankruptcy. We missed that window. So now what we're stuck with is all this bad debt, and the question is really, who's going to eat it? Is it going to be the banks? Is it going to be the taxpayers? Is it going to be the bondholders? I suspect it's going to be us taxpayers and not the banks or the bondholders.
Why?
Just because Wall Street pretty much owns Congress, that if you look at what's been going on, we were talking earlier, the Democrats are completely inept, and it takes the Republicans to be so far out in left field to make the inept Democrats look good. That's what we have in D.C. There is no leadership. It's let's see which way the wind is blowing. Someone has to grow a spine and say, this is wrong, we have to put a stop to this, and so far no one's come up and done that. And I'm talking about both Congress and the White House. There's just a dearth of leadership.
As Ron Paul said recently in the podcast, he said, we have to change the direction of the wind.
So far, nothing has been able to do that.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's a delight to see you. Happy summer to you.
Same to here. Pleasure to see you again.
Barry Ritholtz, Fusion IQ, Bailout Nation. Check it out if you haven't already.